Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Professor Taehwan Kim at Korea National Diplomatic Academy. You probably don't know how much I'm excited, how much I'm honored to moderate this very important final session. Well, we ended, this is a long day today. Indeed, we have gone through from this morning, early this morning, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, throughout 3 sessions. Voila, finally we are the final stage and the stage here. In the first session, we just assessed the implications, the meanings of the upcoming ASEAN-Korea, Republic of Korea commemorative summit to be held next month in Busan. Particularly, we particularly focused on the specific roles, what roles the summit will play in the coming years, okay, the meanings and implications. In the second session, we looked back into the 30 years, past the 30 years, 3 decades of ASEAN-Korean relationship. And also, we tapped the possibility, bright possibility of moving forward into upcoming, years, 5 years, 10 years, hopefully 30 years, another 30 years. And the previous session, our focus has been on people-centered relationship, people-to-people exchange, which I think is particularly since my expertise in public diplomacy, I think it's way important. We cannot overemphasize the importance of heart-to-heart, people-to-people relations. Finally, in this session, our task, in fact, is twofold, I believe. The first one is make an announcement of Chair's statement. And also, we have, although the Chair's statement contains very specific policy recommendations, but then we have our colleagues from ASEAN countries here joining us at the final session as panels. So they're going to have some additional comments, particularly with a focus on specific policy recommendations. Okay. So that, I think, would wrapping up the session. And then I personally was so much, I would say, surprised having read this Chair's statement. I've been through numerous international conferences and seminars myself, but then I felt, having read this Chairman's statement, I think this is a genuinely an exemplar case of a intellectual collective good. Why? Because this is not drafted by Korean and imposed on the participants. I do know for sure for that. I had a chance to read all the papers from ASEAN participants. And then one amazing fact is that this couple-page Chairman's statement actually contains all important points made by 10 ASEAN papers. But unfortunately, I haven't had any chance to read Korean papers. They didn't give me Korean papers. So I'm not sure whether this Chair's statement contains Korea's point or not, because I haven't had chance to read Korean papers. But then I should say that I don't know who actually drafted this Chairman's statement, but then those who drafted this statement, I believe, without reluctance, I could say that it's a true, genuine genius. This is a prime example case of collective work, intellectual collective good. So without much ado, I'd like to pass my microphone to Chair of today's dialogue, Chancellor of Korea National Diplomatic Academy, Dr. Joon Hyung, to briefly make announcement of officially the Chair's statement.
Thank you, Chair. Another Chair, Professor Kim, Moderator. Thank you very much. All day, I really tribute respect that you have a big patience and effort to stay all day. And as Professor Kim mentioned, that this outcome we have, I'm excited too. And let me summarize what I said this morning, and then regarding next step, what should we do? Let me express my opinion. I, as the chair of the dialogue, opened the dialogue and maintained that dialogue is organized in order to introduce an exchange and communication mechanism at track 2. Track 2 level, probably we can call it 1.5 track. Among major foreign policy think tanks between ROK and ASEAN on a regular basis to enhance mutual understanding of ROK and ASEAN on the current and the future issues of common concern and interest in the broader context of political, security, and economic development in the region, and to provide policy suggestions and recommendations that would contribute to enhancing ASEAN-ROK strategic partnership, as well as strengthening connectivity between the ROK's new Southern policy and ASEAN community building. The dialogue was structured thematically into 4 sessions. Session 1, 2019, Commemorative Summit and the Future of ROK-ASEAN Relations. Session 2, ROK-ASEAN Cooperation Toward Regional Prosperity and Peace. And Session 3, Enhancing People-Centered Cooperation and Public Diplomacy. And the Session 4, Joint Policy Recommendations and Announcement of Chair's Statement, which we are doing now. Regarding the next steps, the dialogue acknowledged that ASEAN-ROK think tank strategic dialogue could become an important platform to serve as exchange and communication mechanism at track 2 level between ASEAN and ROK, and to provide policy suggestions and recommendations that would contribute to enhancing ASEAN-ROK strategic partnership. The dialogue agreed that the participating institution ASEAN and ROK need to develop the dialogue to become a regular event rested on rotating basis in the future, and welcomed and appreciate the willingness of Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam to host the dialogue in 2020. I think we need applause for that. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Chancellor Kim. Now, as I said, we have 4 colleagues from ASEAN countries joining us at this final stage. So why don't we start with Mr. Farlina Binti, MD side, from Foreign Policy and Security Studies, Malaysia.
Thank you very much, Professor. Firstly, I wish to thank the Korean National Diplomatic Academy for putting together this exchange and for giving this kind opportunity to share some thoughts on possible on the joint policy recommendations and chair statement. To continue from the panel before, actually just a little side note on building awareness, Tan Sri Rastam was saying instead of only having an ASEAN train for member states and stakeholders to also explore Korea perhaps through a cruise, which Tan Sri was actually saying was something that was done by Japan in the past. I wish to congratulate the Institute of Foreign Affairs and National Security at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy on the preparation of the joint policy recommendation and the chair statement. I personally have expanded my points of views in the gathering of such esteemed minds. As this is the panel that stands between participants and celebrating a well-deserved Friday night, I aim to make this interjection brief. So I will speak on functionality and purposes in themes of cooperation, particularly from past joint statements. Second, on dialogue and digital economy as important aspects of the joint policy statements. And third, on possible challenges. Through the years, particularly since the joint statement of the ASEAN-ROK Commemorative Summit on the 25th anniversary of the ASEAN-ROK dialogue relations that was titled Building Trust, Bringing Happiness, cooperation in the pillars can be characterized by several focuses. For instance, in political security areas are security cooperation in issues of terrorism, transnational crime, and maritime security. ASEAN centrality is expressed through participation and support in ASEAN-led mechanisms such as ARF, ASEAN Plus 3, and ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus. For economics relations, through the years, it's the development of SMEs, where the 25th anniversary of the ASEAN-ROK relations sought human resources development, sharing of best practices, as well as linkages in supply chain networks. In this, the relationship is robust, with various exchanges, such as the ASEAN-Korea CEO Summit, the ASEAN-Korea SME Business Program, and the technical advice and solutions from Korea Program Moving Processes. Korea's contribution to narrow the development gaps through efforts in the Mekong region and smart cities development is also welcome. People-to-people exchange, as we have heard, are numerous, with programs in terms of public diplomacy and increasing tourism numbers. We have observed that coinciding policies, such as the New Southern Policy, propagate sustainability in relations. While the relations of ASEAN and Korea grew in some areas, there are also others that experienced lesser growth due to changing priorities or were relocated to different convening spaces for effectiveness. These can be such as the promotion of moderation mentioned in the ASEAN-ROK plan of 2016 to 2020. These are indicative of the dynamic nature in ASEAN and ROK relationship that can be susceptible to geostrategic conditions, changing institutions, and domestic drive. Thus, emphasizing conversations through today is functionality, purpose, and support from various stakeholders. It would be necessary to drive the themes of relations. While the themes of relations have been fairly consistent through the years, implementation of activities can vary in success in accordance to functionality. The level of interest and support from the domestic populations makes awareness very important. Thus, I wish to continue to the second point, which is on consistent dialogue and digital economy as platforms to build future relations between ASEAN and ROK. Widening the scope of exchanges on strategic and security matters can explore the role of ASEAN and Korea in issues of concern to all parties. This would mean exploring ASEAN's role for peace on the Korean Peninsula or collectively exchanging knowledge on specific issues such as information security, challenges of demography, the environment crisis, or shifts in major power dynamics. For the latter, it is particularly important where smaller and middle powers are attempting to find order and leadership in these issues of flux, as mentioned throughout the day. An understanding of the limitations in these dialogues would be helpful, whether this be in the framing of issues, as security dialogues can focus on traditional security challenges, while the world faces various non-traditional security concerns as well. Additionally, channels of dialogue can extend to various stakeholders to uphold and provide consistency to policy implementation. We have heard in the previous session how it is beyond just the state that actually drives the relationship between nations. Ladies and gentlemen, also welcome would be the role of Korea in stimulating ASEAN's innovative sectors. As technology and the fourth industrial revolution unfolds, nations will be forced to adopt and adapt ecosystems for conduct that would enrich nations through digitization. This can mean enriching the people in terms of connectivity, enriching the economies through the revolution of industries, or enriching discussions on regional and global safe cyber practices through technical collaborations or expressions of support for norms such as those promoted by UN processes. In every policy, the challenge is implementation, and implementation has considerations ranging from time to achieving the desired results to setting the platforms for growth. The weakness of time is that lengthy implementation can drain resources. Resources require political will or the commitment of institutional mechanisms. This will impact short-term or long-term achievements or desired results. For some programs, it will be an investment to the ASEAN-ROK future, such as infrastructure development that can narrow development gaps and build towards greater economic activity, be it online or offline, or an exchange of experts that will build greater awareness and draw convening strategic points of views which can set the tracks for future policies. Drawing the best of these programs may protract impact if implemented in a coordinated manner. Getting the bang for your buck, some would say. Before I conclude, I wish to share of ISIS Malaysia's activities in keeping dialogue on Korea and possible areas of interest in Korea alive. We have formed the Malaysia Scholars on Korea Network the MAS network for short, which is a network of academicians, think tankers, and teachers who look into Korea. We're actually a humble number. We're around 19, and we actually range from those from IR background as well as language teachers, because these are people who are involved in propagating or understanding how Malaysians understand Korea. In the coming month, we'll be organizing the ISIS Malaysia Forum in Korea that aims to look into the very topic that we're talking about today, the 30 years of ASEAN-ROK relationship. Only we will be speaking of the dialogue partnership for futures, for different futures in such as infrastructure, development, diplomacy, maritime cooperation, as well as Mekong Korea activities. The second session aims to study possible gaps in the current offerings on new Southern policies. And these we actually look at cyber or future economies, as well as possible outreach to North Korea, whether this outreach is actually conducted through Track 1 or through NGOs. The last look at ASEAN's role in mitigating risk on the Korean peninsula. Because as recognized from the very first session, this is an important issue for Korea. Thus, we have speakers from US, China, we have speakers displaying US perspectives, China perspectives, South Korea, and ASEAN's perspective to involve themselves in dynamic discussions and perhaps look at ideas for the way forward. Also, next year would be 60 years of Malaysia-ROK relations, with the 70th year for the beginning of the Korean War. We actually aim to have activities in these areas as well. To conclude, Korea has been a fair partner for ASEAN, where 30 years have gradually elevated the levels of relations to high levels of recognition and exchanges today. Policies such as the New Southern Policy is helpful to build relations. We will welcome 30 more years of relations in building a peaceful, prosperous, and people-centered region, as well as a stable international system. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Farlina. Probably we need some revision in already written statement to reflect to your additional remarks. No, that's just my personal thoughts. Okay, Pich CHARADINE she's from Cambodian Institute for Cooperation and Peace, please.
Thank you, Chairs. Allow me to also express my sincere thanks to KNDA for having this event happens and inviting us here. To be honest, I find it very hard to put into to word and discussion of what to add upon the three panels we had earlier. But I'll try to, and plus given the already written statements, but my point will be tailored into three main points. First of all, I would say ASEAN-Korea relations should continue in a two-way engagement. Mainly, first of all, multilateral platform, that is to continue the ARF, EAS, ADM, plus, but then within that multilateral, to continue the dialogues and engagement, I think as raised by earlier panelists and presenters in following earlier sessions, that these shall be like the ultimate dialogue platform to continue to strengthen as of how Korea can elevate and regards ASEAN as the key partners and platform, just as other external partners. Second is is bilaterally, and bilaterally I would refers to ASEAN-Korea itself, but also Korea with each particular ASEAN member states, as of how each countries, how Korea can engage or can participate in engagement, expanding the cooperation in each individual country, given that each country would have our own different needs and priority area. This is perhaps some of the key points that Korea itself could look into as of how can step in and fill in the gaps of each particular country of ASEAN. And that as a whole will, I think, in a long-term prospect, will enhance further ASEAN-Korea relations. For some other country, when you look at the external partner with ASEAN, there's always like kind of unbalanced relation with one country rather than the other, and that I think in the long term, you wouldn't be able to regard it as, or to strengthen or to enhance the cemented the ASEAN-Korea relation as a whole. My second point is on multi-stakeholder dialogues, which we have actually discussed it mainly. For example, Track 2 network. You can look at expanding to think tank network. I think we have already done a lot on the, let's say, press, medias, civil societies, university network. So all of these Track 2 network, I think in the long run, long terms would enhance the connections between the two parties, that is ASEAN and Korea, forward. Apart from that, we please continue to utilize the existing platform. For example, we have Korean Foundation. How can Korean Foundation, for example, work together more with the with ASEAN Foundation? We also have that. And we have we had a privilege to visit ASEAN Korea Center yesterday as well. I think they have done great work, and by continue to do so, I have a positive tones for ASEAN Korea relation in the future. In Cambodia, for example, we have Cambodia Korea Cooperation Center, which play a huge role in enhancing and cementing the bilateral relation, apart from the embassy work with the G2G relation. So, so these are some of the examples. ASEAN Smart City Network, for example, with under the Singaporean chairmanship, we set it out, and given the advantage that Korea technology has and the smart city technologies, perhaps these are the area that Korea can help and build partnership with the ASEAN Smart City Network. I think Ms. Kim from Asian Korea Center mentioned the ASEAN Youth Network, ASEAN Korea Youth Network, and I think this is like an excellent initiative, which we will should stick to and increase and further. My last point is on political security, and I think this is probably the most debatable and most controversial issues. I've, as somebody who worked a lot on the Mekong, I think I still have a positive and optimistic view on the Mekong and Korea issues. Mekong-Korea partnership. My argument would be, yes, there is a congestion in the Mekong initiative, Mekong sub-regional initiative, but Korea has not done enough to show your own visibility. For example, with the newly established Lam Chang Mekong, it's very fast, but it's just newly established, but they've done so much. So given like you are the newcomer, and in this November 2019, Mekong Korea going to elevate that to summit level. Right? So this will be a good opportunity to actually step forward and say, look, we do care about the Mekong, and we have Han River. So this is make it a good connections of how you can look into sustainability aspect, environment, youth exchanges, but also on policy level, how you can maintain the flow of the Mekong, for example. We do mention the rule-based international order, but I doubt if Korea could actually step in for the very controversial issue of South China Sea, for example, because having U.S. involved so far is complicated enough. We're joining into the COC, Code of Conduct for South China Sea. And some of the ASEAN, we don't have one voice. So if you have more and more external partners, I believe it's just more complicated. It's just gonna complicate the issues. But I agree with the points that we adhere to rule-based international order, regional order for the Southeast Asia region. Also, with the new Southbound policy, I think in the statement it mentions as of how it can link up to the newly adopted ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, on ASEAN centrality, ASEAN network. But these are some of the things. So with the last panel, I think Professor Cho mentions that new Southbound policy does not have a positions on, for example, Indo-Pacific of the US or BOI of China. But, and the same goes with AOIP, ASEAN outlook of the Indo-Pacific. So we have our own stance on the Indo-Pacific rather than aligning with ones and to upset the other. So now that we have this one, we can actually link up and see how a new southbound policy and AOIP can link up and concretize it. And I think the chair statement really emphasizes, and I think it's a really good move toward the relation. So last but not least, I'm looking forward to another 30 years of concrete cooperation between ASEAN and Korea. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. Very well organized and systematic policy recommendations. Since you give so much emphasis not only on ASEAN-Korean multilateral relationship, but also Korea's bilateral relationship with each member country of the ASEAN. Do you have any personal expectations that Korea possibly there's some room for improvement in bilateral relationship between Korea and Cambodia in particular?
So just to add that a little bit, we do have a lot. So actually, one of the area for now that there's a boom is a people migration, so people movement. There's a huge immigrants from Cambodia to Korea, and that actually sparks up the language learning, for example. And most of the peoples that work in Korea go back and they learn the skill, they learn the technology, and become high-skilled labor. So these are the areas where. But among others, Korea has been much visible on the grassroots level. For example, in aiding the people in needs and stuff. You have also like yes, and even the voluntary like doctor groups and stuff, which goes actually at voluntary work. A lot of voluntary work. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, the point is well taken. Thank you very much, Pich. Then we go over to Mr. Chian KOH, who is from Center for Strategic and Policy Studies, Brunei. Please.
All right, thank you, Chair. So again, thank you to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Korea, and KNDA for organizing this dialogue and inviting us here. So in terms of the policy recommendations, instead of going through everything, I'm just going to confine myself to the policy recommendations that relates to economic prosperity. So before I go into the specific policy recommendations, I just want to provide a sort of economic context on how we get to the policy recommendations. So throughout the day, we've talked a lot about the geostrategic rivalry between US and China. And Daljit has mentioned that there are a lot of implications and consequences. So in terms of the trade side, we've been seeing for the past year and a half, there are a lot of distortions in terms of trade movements and commodity movements from US-China trade tensions. So there have been a lot of volatility in the global markets. So if we just focus on soybeans, for example, so once tariffs on soybeans were imposed, so there was a massive trade diversion. So basically there was a collapse in soybean exports from US, and then you can see the massive increase in export volume from Brazil and Argentina, for example, to China. So that's one distortion that is felt immediately. So there are other examples when tariffs were imposed on aluminum, on washing machines and solar panels, and you can basically see the price differentials between, for example, in the US markets and on the London Metal Exchange. So these are like real on the ground immediate implications from this trade war. So, I mean, we are living in a highly uncertain world. So apart from these US-China trade tensions that has impact on basically global growth, I mean, there are a lot of other uncertainties, right? You have geopolitical tensions in the Middle East, you have US sanctions on Iran, then you have the uncertainty over Brexit, and you have here social unrest in Hong Kong, for example. So basically the point is that the IMF and the World Bank, they have revised global growth forecasts repeatedly downwards, and that's going to have an impact on the region, basically, right? So basically here, ASEAN nations, Korea, we depend a lot on exports to China, for example, a lot of raw materials and intermediate inputs. So basically, this trade war is not doing China any favors and also not doing the rest of us any favors, all right? And apart from that, I mean, so everyone says when China sneezes, right, and the rest of Asia catches a cold. So that's where the term comes from. So we are bracing for a marked global growth slowdown. And basically, this weakening global economic prospects, right, also could pose a risk to financial stability. So there's something that hasn't been discussed here today. So we are reminded of the pain 20 years ago, 97, 98, Asian financial crisis, and the 2008 GFC. So everyone says there's a major recession every 10 years. So we are sort of due for a recession. So in that respect, we need to increase our economic resilience, improve financial stability, and basically look at improving social safety nets in ASEAN countries. So that goes to the point in one of the policy recommendations, that is, here we should reiterate and reaffirm our support for free trade and economic liberalization. So in this regard, the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, has the potential to deliver opportunities for all the 16 participating countries, right? So they account for about half of the world's population and 30% of the world's GDP. So yes, so another policy recommendation is to expedite the conclusion to the negotiations of RCEP. So the second policy recommendation is to explore opportunities for expansion of trade relations, and more importantly, to diversify markets for ROK and ASEAN's goods and services. Okay. And the third is to mutually facilitate access for ASEAN and ROK investors to respective markets, cooperate in innovative sectors, R&D, and promotion of SMEs. So we already have a few agreements in place to advance trade and investment, so we should capitalize on them. So we have the ASEAN-ROK Free Trade Area. We should strive to continue negotiations for further tariff liberalization under the ASEAN-ROK Trade in Goods Agreement. So a lot of focus should be on streamlining customs procedure, trade facilitation, and leverage on the ASEAN-ROK Trade in Services Agreement and the ASEAN-ROK Investment Agreement. So I just want to talk briefly on these 3 points. There are other areas on peace and people which I'll pass on to my co-panelists.
Thank you very much, Richard, particularly for your very kind explanations on the policy recommendations written in this statement. Okay, last but not least, Andrew Wiguna MANTONG from Center for Strategic and International Studies, Indonesia. Please, Manton.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I would also like to extend my gratitude to Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs and KNDA for inviting us here and to form this network of a think tank to discuss the future of ASEAN and Korea relations. Also, the hardest thing about the last speaker is to find something interesting to say, and I hope I will not be long, and I will try to keep my talk as short as possible. So I would like to share you my take and my reflection having read this statement. There are 2 things that comes into my mind, at least on the abstract level. First, reading these statements, I can help but thinking that I'm glad to find that there are some kind of awareness in our talks, in our discussion, in our papers that we already submitted to the organizer. That first, even though the biggest challenge of the international regional dynamics today is related to the US-China competition, a lot of problem in this region still also related to the fact that we, in various countries in East and Southeast Asia, still have the problem that is coming from the unfinished business of nation and state building. So government and state in Southeast Asia as well, and probably to some extent in East Asia, we're still trying to find our way to make sure that our decision, both at national and regional level, could be implemented effectively throughout the realm of our sovereignty. So in that light, I think it is also important that this document and our talks has also acknowledged that there are need to focus on issues beyond security matters, or at least beyond security in a very conventional matters. So it brings me to my second point. I'm happy with the fact that the draft already mentioned some kind of policy recommendation, like for example to allow ASEAN and ROK to come up with a common voice at multilateral forums. I think that's important. Also to reiterate principles, inclusive, open, transparent, which also can be found on the ASEAN Indo-Pacific outlook that has recently been introduced. And also one clear statement about reiteration of ROK's support on ASEAN centrality and endorsement of the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. Reading, if I can go back to the document, I have a mixed feeling having read the document of ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific, because it begins with something big. It acknowledges the challenge that is coming from the geopolitical dimension, but it ends with a very specific set of objectives, like for example on maritime affairs and on sustainable development and so on and so forth. But I think there is something good about this, which also remind me to the one of the old concept of the security, which is cooperative and comprehensive security. And I think this has been reflected both at the NSP and AOIP. That I think from the initial foundation, at least back to the era when ASEAN Regional Forum was established, we celebrate the concept that when we think about security, we don't think that security always come up with the way we identify some kind of enemy. And there are some effort to identify that several issues would eventually lead to peaceful condition. And if we focus pursuing security from the economic sector, from the environment sector, and from the sector related to the national stability, we eventually will arrive to the bigger idea of the security. And I think this is the unspoken feature of the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific, which also can be found at how the future of a new Southern policy could be implemented in the future. So I'm also glad with the fact that we both acknowledge that the growing initiative, for example, in infrastructure development, would not lead into a zero-sum situations. And I think this is also the kind of awareness that has been apparent, at least at the ASEAN level. So with that, I think if I can move further, there are some, for example, issues that we can actually put principles of openness, transparency, and inclusiveness into operationalization. First, there's one activities we have been doing at CSIS. For example, when Indonesia's government was trying to come up with their idea of Indo-Pacific, they've been asking us. The coordinating ministry of maritime affairs asked us to identify what kind of maritime issues that will not create tensions at regional level. So we've been thinking about the issues of maritime safety, and after we come up with several white papers and policy recommendation, we also realized that this is also the issues at the Korea, and this is something that we can also learn from the Korea, especially with regards to your experience dealing with ferry incident and so on and so forth. So if we portray the issues of maritime from maritime security into maritime safety, we can come up with the new ideas, not always about enmity, but also about providing the public goods to the regional level. So if we can come up with the joint experience sharing with rules making on how shipping should be conducted, how standard of the ship could be improved, and how to make sure that our shipping activities will not endanger the environment, I think we can fill up some gap could be potentially left by the upcoming superpower competition. What has been worrying about the superpower competition is we probably in the future would also have the irresponsible power who's not been interested in building some kind of rule of the game that should become the framework of how state could interact with each other. So we identify these kind of issues like, for example, maritime safety. And we've also been worried that the cyber competition and technological competition between the China side and the US side will actually hamper our our efforts to create more connectivity, like for example in Indonesia, we're going to build the eastern part of Indonesia, and probably the technology will come to China, and we've been worried that this kind of efforts would be hampered by the fact that growing competition between US and China would eventually shift away and find its way to this new area. So also, we also have to think deeply about how to make a good cooperation and environment. Because I think in ASEAN, this is new issues, and it has not really been picked. And looking at the behavior of superpower, it's a bit hopeless now, especially coming from the US and the China. And also one of the most important points when we talk about public goods at the regional level, we should also speak about natural disaster. This is a big issue in Indonesia. This is a big issue also in not only ASEAN but also East Asia countries. And given the fact that potentially natural disaster will come more often in the future, we don't want this kind of dimension, this kind of affairs to become the new area where aid and efforts to alleviate the kind of suffering becoming the new power play between irresponsible power in the future. Of course, there are some other issues related to sustainable development. We should not only talk about infrastructure, but we also should talk about how human resources could be improved to make a better use of those infrastructure that would be available in the future. So I'm happy with this, and I hope this in the future would develop into more strategic as well as practical recommendations and evaluations in the future. So I hope also this forum could function as the platform to study and to observe and how to, ponder the improbable in the future. Thank you so much.
Well, Andrew, thank you very much. What can I say? Well, thank you very much for your very insightful and creative input. Well, indeed, we actually today, for a long day, we have dealt with many issues. But then, I'm gonna give you a chance. Dealt with many issues, but we have to admit that there are still many no less important issues left untouched. But then I personally don't have any worry. I don't worry about it that much because as our chair announced in the beginning of the session, this strategic dialogue will be regularized, meaning that this is not simply, this session is not simply an end, but simply a mark of a new beginning. Okay, so Andrew, don't worry about it. We're gonna accumulate all the issues, all the thoughts from this time on. Okay, from right this time on, and we're gonna put those thoughts on the table. And finally, is there any additional comment, remarks from the floor, Professor Chair? By the way, why don't we give a big hand to Professor Chair, who is actually the one who is behind organizing all this conference. Please, Dr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I'd like to make a point about one of the points raised by the panelists. It's about Miss Pich from Cambodia. She talked about Korean stance or approach about South China Sea. So far, Korea has been kind of embracing some sort of a silent diplomacy regarding South China Sea. The main reason is we don't want to get entangled in the U.S.-China rivalry. That's kind of safest way of doing business. But I wanted to remind you and point out that geographically, Korea is located at the southern tip of Korean Peninsula, the continental end of the end of continental Asia. But geo-economically and geopolitically, Korea is a maritime nation. If you look at the northward of Korea, you are blocked by DMZ, by North Korea, right? So we are effectively isolated from the continental Asia. the only conduit for us to do business and do all those people-to-people exchange, all those things are southward through maritime. And also, we are a trading nation. So Korean economy is totally dependent upon trade. So energy imports and our export goes through the maritime route, sea lines communication. So the safety and security of sea lines communication, including South China Sea, is fundamental interest. We have enormous, huge stake. So, I mean, the fact that we have been comparatively silent about South China Sea does not mean that we don't have any interest or whatever, right? So if you look at the remarks made by Minister Gang in the air of a meeting in last August, she made a little bit different comment, official, in closed setting. She made a different kind of speech compared to before. That means that we are getting more and more proactive in terms of engaging with our Southeast Asian partners. And I think there will be more positive developments on the part of Korean side regarding our kind of approach to the issue. So, yeah, you might be true. So we are not, for now, we are not able to make a very kind of outright remarks officially about that. But I think we are very well aware of that. And yeah, things will get better in terms of cooperation.
Pich, quick response?
Yes. Professor Choi, I think you got me wrong. Because what I actually mentioned is that I thought there were like some comments made by the previous some of the panels earlier that South China Sea is a critical challenge to Southeast Asia, and that somehow Korea could also step in and sort of lobby and all that. My proposition, my suggestion is that I personally don't think South China Sea is the area where South Korea should jump in. The reason being that our ASEAN folks, ASEAN countries, that we don't have one position. This is the maritime issue, but also more with bilateral. So even with the code of conduct, we suggest that, okay, you deal it with bilaterally with China and the climate state. So my suggestion, my proposition was that this is the area where Korea shouldn't jump in. Yes,
okay.
I in fact mentions that Mekong is, I in fact mentions that Mekong issue is the area where Korea really need to dive in.
Right.
Yes.
Good, thank you. Please understand, Won-gi is a very sensitive person. Okay? No, Mr. Dalit Singh, you have some say? Microphone, please. Would you please hold 1 second? Microphone, yeah.
You know, it's generally understood in Southeast Asia that the more outside powers that are engaged in Southeast Asia, the better. And even in the South China Sea, many see China's actions as trying to create a close sphere of influence. And many countries are opposed to that. And I'm not saying that ASEAN should take a position, but at least bilaterally, many countries would be opposed to that.
Is it okay to start a new session based on the topic of South China Sea? No? Okay. No more discussion. All right, yeah.
Thank you very much. I do not want to get into any discussion on this because otherwise it'll be like a session at the United Nations, right of reply by one side to the other and so on. I would simply like to say on behalf of the participants from the ASEAN Institutes, first of all, we'd like once again to thank Chancellor Kim and KNDA and all the others for this wonderful 2 days that we've had here. Yesterday we had a very good discussion, and today also we had a very good open session. There are a lot of things that have been discussed, and the outcome is very clear. We have been to several dialogues and fora where there's no clear outcome, no document or anything of that sort. If that document does not reflect everything that is said, I don't think we need to worry. Otherwise, the senior officials won't have enough work to do. Let them do the rest of it. But I think what has been done is that this, as has been said, this is the beginning of a process of dialogue at the track 2 or track 1.1, 1.5 level. And we are very happy to be part of this. And we'll also be very happy to continue with this for the future. So once again, thank you very much to our Korean friends and colleagues for the generous hospitality and warm reception given to us. We will go home with very fond memories of this, if I may say, with this first dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Rasta Mod Isa, particularly for stopping us from going further, too far. Okay, thank you very much. Finally, we're going to close the session, the long march, just for today, this year, with our final words from Chair of the Dialogue, Chancellor KNDA, Dr. Joon Hyung.
Thank you very much. I was told this session is just reading sessions for the outcome, Chair's statement, but it's really lively and it's good. And it definitely is not mood for ending, it's mood for another beginning. That's why we are going to meet again next year. And this strategic dialogue is kind of setting the tone for the upcoming summit meeting. You know, track 2, the strength is we can be more flexible and creative, but the problem, we don't have resources and political will to implement. So I hope our message, you know, transfers to the upcoming summit meeting. That is really important, and I hope for that. And finally, and I sincerely salute all the efforts made by staffs behind us, and especially yesterday, one of our research assistants exhausted and hospitalized. She's okay now, and I salute again her efforts to this. And thank you very much, and safe trip back home with good memory. Thank you very much.